Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Greetings. This evening's Dharma talk is titled, What a Fool Sees. What a Fool Sees. Isn't that what I said? So this comes from a quote by Dogen Zenji, the 13th century founder of this particular lineage of Buddhism, the Soto lineage. And it is, see if I can remember it. A fool sees himself as another, while one who is wise sees, how does that go?
Others as himself.
Sees others as himself. Odd thing to be saying. So a fool is mixed up about identity and will quite often try to reaffirm that. One of the things we often hear people say in conversation, well, I've always thought this and this and this. Or else they'll say, well, I'm the kind of person who I just don't do this. I don't donate money to charities. I'm the kind of person that just doesn't. I'm the kind of. Always describing themselves and redefining in a way that helps them continue to act like a fool, fundamentally. Is everyone hearing me? Yes, thank you. The wise person actually, everywhere they look, they're actually seeing that they're not separate from anyone. They're not seeing themselves as some kind of individual identity. That doesn't mean that they don't function in such a way to when they go to put on their shoes, they don't know which shoes are theirs. They're not confused about the separation, but they're also not confused about the fundamental nature of their identity and the identity of everyone else, that it is not separate. And in your mind stream, when anything arises in the mind stream to get in your way or obstruct something you want, you or the fool, not that you're a fool, you might not be a fool at all, we push back because we want this or we don't want that. We buy into the three poisons as being somehow accurate because it's our feeling, this is how I feel. Well, the way I feel is, well, how do you feel about that, Jim, George, Herman? How do you feel, Mary? How do you feel? What do you think about? We tend to swap ideas and opinions. What's your opinion about this or that? And we have conversations that continually reify that foolishness. That you are a separate being. If we saw our true nature, if you actually saw your true nature, if everyone saw their true nature, there would be no need for even maybe some regulations, but not many laws or rules, because the respect for others would come welling out of you every time you were around anyone. You would just be respectful. This doesn't mean that you would fall at their feet and worship everyone. It doesn't mean that you would do as you're told by others because we're all one. It's not a we're all one kind of dynamic. The fool sees himself as another, whereas one who is wise sees himself, herself, as the others. Would be my way of saying it. I'm not sure how the Japanese how the original Japanese for that quote shows up, but what is seen is not that your identity and their identity are synonymous, or there's still a great separation, just like there's separations between the fingers. The thumb never gets mixed up with the little finger. You don't mix those up. They're separated, but they're not separate. Similar image that I use quite often as a metaphor for the idea of not separate. You can contemplate that a little while. Contemplate the way in which you divide yourself away from others. One of the ways that we often do it is to judge others. Criticize others. Get down on others. And it's not that we shouldn't. It's not that we shouldn't be critical of someone who is so chaotic that they're causing suffering and difficulty and pain to others. It's not that we shouldn't see that, or even perhaps even step into it. But that stepping into it wouldn't necessarily come out of an attitude of warfare that that person has to be stopped or punished, or the whole idea of punishment is an incredible misunderstanding. So we continue to elaborate on who we are and what we're doing and how we feel and what we think about what other people are thinking about what we're thinking, and what we think about what the other people are thinking about what we're thinking they're thinking. You know, I'm describing something that we're doing all the time. It sounds kind of silly if we say it that way, but it's actually true. We're actually thinking about what other people are thinking we think. We even say it sometimes. Well, I don't want you to think that I think that you're incorrect. We have those little conversations with our so-called self and the so-called other, and we go back and forth and trade sides with that, continually reestablishing, reaffirming some kind of possibility of getting control of things from the point of view of a relative person who has themselves or has their situation under control. So the idea here is to actually see this yourself. See, watch, observe, see the way the mind continues to arise and push, arise and pull or elaborate or change or modify or reinterpret, and the way the mind shows up to shut down or turn away from or distract. Those three poisons. Protect that which is not really threatened. There is no solid self in the skandhas, the form, feeling, perception, concept, thinking process, and consciousness of the six sense fields and their objects. They don't show up as somebody, as some solid being. This doesn't mean that if you realize this, that suddenly you don't know who you are, and you try to go and get on the bus, and then you realize that you're not on the bus. You're imagining yourself as somebody else getting on the bus. Now, it's not saying you're nuts. You're somehow crazy. As Trungpa Rinpoche once said, if awakening were that kind of crazy, we'd have to have an enlightenment ward for everyone. Rather, what you're seeing is the fundamental nature of this world, with all of the beings and all of the comings and goings that are based on warfare, based on peace fair. I'm trying to go the other way and calm everything down and be peaceful without looking at the fundamental disturbance itself, which is mistaken identity. Thinking that there is some person who can get somewhere, thinking that there is some person who can become realized or become not so foolish. So the idea is to look at the disturbance in your mind stream as you interact with other people, with your partner, your mate, your husband, your wife, your son, daughter, mother, father. Look at that dynamic, the way that operates. And notice the way you are protecting some things and ignoring other things in the mind stream. It is about awareness. It is not about some kind of accomplishing, some kind of strategy for somehow not making any more mistakes, or somehow having some kind of control or some kind of oversight, some kind of supervision over everything so nothing goes awry. Any questions about this whole idea of mistaken identity?
Shogabang, it seems like sometimes we talk about foolishness or embarrassment, and then we talk about fundamentally being a fool. Does the being a fool have a quality or a characteristic like being embarrassed does?
I think it does. A willingness to be a fool is something Trungpa Rinpoche would talk about, just a willingness to not always constantly protect or justify or validate or make excuses for anyone's particular activity, a willingness to lose, a willingness to be at a loss, a willingness to be foolish. So I could also say on top of what Dogen said, that the person who really realizes their foolishness 10 minutes ago, that might have been the fool, but then they realize it, and by realizing they're foolish, they actually aren't foolish anymore because they're aware of that. It even says, there's a saying somewhere, the fool who persists in his folly will become wise. I don't know if I would go along with that or not, but it's an interesting statement to continue to do something that's foolish and then perhaps eventually realize what you've been up to. So it's like embarrassment. More?
Shogabang, is there still a discontinuity with realizing that one is a fool?
What?
Shogabang, I guess I have this misunderstanding that if I see that I'm a fool, that's something that will be a stable understanding. So I'm wondering if there's still discontinuity with...
It won't necessarily stabilize. Further questions? Give me some help with this. Ask questions. Yes.
The title being What a Fool Sees.
Yes.
How can we change how we see something?
By looking at the way you make assumptions about things, the way you grasp at some things and reject others, as if there's a solid separate being here who wants his or her way. And this is what Shikantaza or sitting meditation is about, to sit down and train your mind to watch what comes and goes without doing anything with it. So that possibly right on the cushion, more than likely, it'll be some time in your everyday life where you begin to see the way you're throwing up, moving and pushing and shoving ideas and concepts around to protect an imaginary being that you think you are, that needs protection or needs to be right or doesn't want to be embarrassed, doesn't want to be wrong, or someone thinks we're wrong and we know we're not wrong, so we want to fight with them or argue with them or disagree with them. Or
Bowing feels like when we start to see that, when that embarrassment shows up at what we've seen about ourselves, there's a shutting down or an impulse to shut that down or shut awareness of that down. How
Yes.
do we keep seeing that?
so you're already saying that you can see it. There's an impulse to want to shut that down. And that impulse or that seeing or that awareness of that will continue to arise as long as there's mind training, as long as we're returning to some kind of structure that helps us see what is true rather than believe things that protect us, protect our identity, opinions, ideas, and so on. Just that you're able to ask the questions, that particular question tells me that you're doing it. You just need to do a lot of it. You need to return to it, return to the three jewels, return to the wall, return to training the mind, to sharpening the awareness by watching what comes and goes in the mind stream without grasping, without rejecting, and without shutting down. And as we do that, as you all know, those of you who have done sitting meditation for years know that you're very aware of the comings and goings of the mind. That sometimes we resist it. Something comes up, instead of just observing it come and go like weather, we have an opinion about it, we have an idea about it, or we abandon that for who caused it. Blame. And it's not that situation that you might be blaming didn't cause, in the sense of trigger it, but it was not necessarily the direct cause of it. It's your nerve endings. It's just like I can take a needle and poke myself in the arm, and you may sympathize with that, it may not feel so good, but it's my nerve ending. So if I say something to insult you or criticize you or point out something that you know that you've been doing, but you don't really want to be reminded of, then we could possibly think that our difficult feeling that has been triggered, that someone is actually causing that, doing that to us. It's a very complicated area to be responsible for your own feelings and emotions. You can take that back around and say, well, I thought there wasn't any self. And there isn't any self, but there is a body. There is a whole complex of sensitivity going on there in terms of the consciousness of the mind. It's very, very complicated, which would be an understatement. So just that you can ask that question tells me that you've been looking at it. You're looking at it now. You are endeavoring to be responsible for what's happening. You couldn't ask that question. Further questions? Yes, Wendell.
When you see the foolishness, or that feeling of foolishness or embarrassment, or what Junshu was talking about, is it helpful to see that as the identity, see that as the ego, to flash on that? Is it helpful to do that?
Yes, to see that you're protecting something that's unreal. The teachings are basically telling you that there is no solid self. There's no solid self in the skandhas. There's no self. There's no identity there. Any identity that is there is unreal, and it's based on hope and fear, and it's run by passion, aggression, ignorance, grasping, rejecting or fighting, and distracting or shutting down. And to one who no longer is enamored of that kind of illusion of control is just, I have to say it some way, they're just here all the time. There is no past or present for them. I'm not saying that they don't think about, well, tomorrow I'm going to do this or do that, or yesterday I did this. Of course, there's an understanding of it that way, but the fundamental nature is always here. More?
Well, it seems like if you see that disturbance, I think you called it also, as your false identity, it seems like you're creating otherness, separateness.
Oh, so?
Like observers over here, and there's this ego that you can see at work.
Mm-hmm. It shows up that way, doesn't it? What do you do about that?
It seems like we want to see not separate, but yet creating separation there.
So that separation, that's the beginning of seeing that otherness is unreal. That ego is that fool is protecting himself from something that is, from when there's no fundamental threat at all. Nothing is really threatened. But it's the feeling, the paranoia, the seventh consciousness, as it is talked about in the Yogacara tradition, that aspect of the consciousness called the seventh, or the klesha mind, where everything's on the lookout for a problem, or on the lookout for success, on the lookout for failure, relative.
Well, Divine, I want to ask, how can we see that ego as ourselves? Is that what you're saying here?
So what I'm saying is we have an identity that is unreal. And that identity is validated by, sometimes we're fearful of something, sometimes we're really encouraged by something and supported by something. And so that area of the consciousness shows up as being threatened or being supported or being maybe ignored or indifferent. And that identity is unreal. It's dependently arisen, and it gets its so-called validity from everything else. My way of talking about this is, don't believe your thoughts. Thoughts are going to keep coming and going, but if when you have thoughts or emotions or feelings about anything, it's not that doesn't have a relative, it isn't substantial in a relative way. Of course it is. But if we believe those thoughts, disbelieve this and believe that, and set up that kind of a structure, then we're at the mercy of the causes and conditions that are all around us that we tend to ignore or to make assumptions about. If you realize your true nature, as Dogen said, I don't know what page it's on, you may not realize it. You may not realize you actually become enlightened. Because your idea of what enlightenment is always out here as a standard, and you keep looking to see if you're, and then finally you just give up. Stop looking for anything. You no longer want anything. You never want it, and no longer want something to be different. You no longer want more of something or less of something. You no longer have a position on anything. But you might not realize that you're awake. You might just think, give a shit about anything. But that's probably not the case. If you're actually coming up with that kind of conclusion, then there's some kind of a self behind there that's kind of sarcastic. Is, well, I'm just not going to care about anything anymore. We're not talking about that. Sir.
Sokuzan, does fear need otherness to arise as fear?
It needs the illusion of a threat. Something's wrong. Something's going to take me over or control me. And that, and go ahead.
Sokuzan, it seems like sometimes there's just like a low-level fear that's arising when there's nothing happening. So is the threat still there?
Yes. So let's say it this way: the threat, or the fear, or the emotion, or the thought doesn't have to go anywhere. You don't have to get rid of fear. Fearlessness is not no more fear. It's just no one's afraid. The fearlessness can't find anybody that is afraid, because there is no solid self in the skandhas. There's no solid being anywhere. This does not mean that you won't run out of a burning building. You're not silly. This doesn't mean that you won't, if you're walking down a street and dark street or something, going to your car and you see someone mulling around near your car, that you won't be cautious about that, saying that you might get They might roll you over and steal your money or hurt you. This doesn't mean that you won't see that. So it isn't like you're foolish, like don't, devil may care, but you're clear about that, what that is.
Sokuzan, what is paranoia when it's just ordinary?
You're afraid of something that is not threatening. And the paranoia reifies, substantiates the self that is imaginary. Something comes up, you see somebody, two people are talking and they're kind of nodding towards you, and then you notice they don't realize that you're looking at them, you're watching them, and you start coming up with conclusions about what they're talking about. They're talking about, you're talking behind your back. Any of that, it's very, very, happens to us all the time in some way. Something's going on behind your back kind of thing. To one who is not a fool, using that kind of a polarity, is not a fool, who understands the nature of the self, understands what this is, all the way through, is not paranoid. This doesn't mean they don't possibly think that maybe somebody's talking about them, but they don't care. They're not concerned with other people's neurosis or need to gossip or bitch about somebody or point the finger. Not concerned about that. More? Good area to go into.
Sokuzan, when you say they're not concerned,
It doesn't mean they're dismissive. They see it, but they understand, like just like the one who sees what this is, when they are attacked by someone else who is upset with them, even if it's justified in some way, or the person can have some kind of a justification, the person who is clear about this understands the nature of people who are confused about the nature of themselves and the nature of reality. It doesn't mean that they're going to give them a break and you're going to let the person kill you or hurt you, but you understand that they're coming out of confusion and fear instead of there's somebody I've got to go to war with. Instead, you see not only the war that's coming towards you, or the criticism, or the gossip, or whatever, but you also see that it's coming out of a deep insecurity, deep fear that is confused with confusion about being in the human realm, or being in the hell realm, or being in the jealous God realm, or any of the other states of mind that tend to cloud the mind. Mm-hmm. One more?
yeah.
Questions on Zoom? Questions here in the Zendo? I'm not going to get any help from anybody.
Yu Hong bowing.
Yu Hong's going to help me. Go ahead.
I don't mean to pick up what you said. Just now you said, don't believe the thoughts. So when you say that, it's already feel like shut down. I said, oh, this is story, it's not me. I feel like it's already shut down what is arising. So how can I observe that?
You can address that. If you say, don't believe the thought, if you're lecturing yourself, this is not what I'm talking about. It has to go, it's even more radical, more basic than that. It's not you commenting on don't believe the thoughts. Don't lecture yourself. This doesn't mean that you can't use a reminder out of Atisha's 7 Points of Mind training or any other kind of reminder to help you on the path. But when it comes to not believing your thoughts, you don't have to lecture yourself about it. You can actually see the thought and don't do anything with it. Don't push it away. It means you believe it. Don't grasp at it. That means you believe it. And don't ignore it. Because then you give that thought or that whatever is arising in the mind stream, you give it some kind of credibility where it can continue to spin. So don't believe it, don't disbelieve it, and don't ignore it or look away from it. And don't make any comment on it. Make no elaboration at all. You will not get credit for not believing your thoughts, or not disbelieving your thoughts, or not ignoring your thoughts. Those are the 3 poisons. And it takes a while. It takes a long time to function in such a way that that your clarity or your openness, another word for clarity, is so open and unobstructed by a self that agrees or disagrees or ignores that anything is welcome. So therefore, whatever anybody throws at you, you can receive. This doesn't mean you're going to be some kind of pushover and let somebody rob you or murder you or whatever. But you're clear about what's going on. You're clear about the incredible suffering or pain that maybe someone else is going through that is trying to get rid of that pain by blaming you. Even though they might be able to have a story that shows where they have the right to blame you. You actually said this or did this or in some way. So it's about awareness and being clear about it rather than about not having any more thoughts or some kind of positionality of, I'm just not going to believe my thoughts. Consider what I've just said. Don't believe it? It's true. Don't disbelieve it? It's not true. And don't look away from it. What problem? Or ignore. We all have our work cut out for us in that area. Further questions?
Neutral Valley. If something difficult is happening, if I'm blaming someone for some emotion I'm feeling, and it looks like maybe somebody is to blame or there's a lot of negativity going towards
Yes.
them, and if I'm endeavoring to be responsible for those feelings, but it looks like the feelings are permeating, are showing up somehow towards the other person.
Mm-hmm.
Is there an action or a way of working with endeavoring to be responsible for the emotion?
The way you're asking the question, I would say there is, but I think that the only way that can be worked with is you have to do it. You've asked the question in such a way that I have to say, yes, there is a way. But it's not like repeating a slogan, or it's not like something like that. You're closer to the actual texture of that raw emotion that wants to put it on somebody else. You're close enough to that I would say just feel the texture, just receive the texture instead of taking and turning around what you're feeling or receiving. You're telling me you're receiving it, instead of turning that around and make it into an accusation, a finger point, or you did this, or you, even in your own mind stream. Don't necessarily even do that in your own mind stream and say that, though you may not say that to them. But then if you may not be able to do that. You may feel like you just are upset with them or mad, and the only thing you can do is just get out of there so you don't say something that's rude or abusive. Is to just leave the situation. Have you been there? Just don't give up on it. Continue to be responsible for how you feel. That's what it sounds like you're endeavoring to do, and that's what your question is about. It's not that the relative situation of this caused this. It's not that doesn't happen. It's just that when we take that and try to make it into some motivation for getting rid of that emotion by sending it to somebody else or throwing it back at them because it looked like they threw it at you. And they may be trying to get rid of that by blaming you. That's where wars come from. They attack, and then they attack you, and then you attack them, and then go back and forth. And there's really fundamentally no one is to blame for any of that. This is dependently arisen. Even the self, the ego, is dependently arisen. It just seems extremely real and authentic. Seems very, very substantial. And like we need to get rid of this. You don't need to get rid of it. You need to see what it is. More further questions?
Isaac Bowen.
Isaac, go ahead.
You say you teach, or a true teacher teaches out of what they see and not out of what they know. Um, does a true teacher teach out of concepts that they see? Bowing?
So they might, I can't speak for anybody who teaches the Dharma. I can't say this as a general way of explaining everything that's going on there. I don't know for sure, but I know that I could not teach out of concepts. I teach out of what I see, and then the concepts come up and are kind of secondary, but I can still refer to concepts like the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the 12 links. Those are all concepts that until I saw this, I wasn't sure what the concepts are pointing at. I studied the 12 links on the chain of existence back in the 70s and 80s for years, trying to understand what that was saying. Even though I could see how it broke down, I could not understand. And now I still don't understand in a relative way, but it supports what I'm looking at. So therefore I can teach out of it. I can refer to them. But a scholar might come along who has studied these and is doing this strictly with, maybe not even strictly, maybe they have some insight too, but are using our heavy conceptual structures to talk about, delineate, and show how this all works. They can, I probably will have to walk out of the room. I'll just lose.
Isaac, Bowing, you
Yes.
say the concepts are secondary. What is primary for you?
Vision. You actually see it. You don't see something else. And how are you going to say to somebody when you're sitting here looking at Shoka, and I'm looking at myself? I'm looking at you on the screen. I'm looking at myself. I also see Isaac, of course. I know that this old man is over here and you're over there, but the fundamental situation I'm looking at is not separate. And it's extremely powerful. And I highly recommend that all of you practice this until you see what this is, either in this life or possible other lifetimes. I don't know how that works. It looks like this goes on and on and on. Just don't give up. See it yourself. I can't hand it to you. All I can do is say, I'm looking at it and I see it. I don't promise anything whatsoever. I can't promise anything. It would be a cheap shot to do that. You may never see it. But I feel that if you're listening to me, there's a very good possibility you're ready to hear this and you're ready to look at what is being pointed at. I know if you go on YouTube or any other, not just YouTube, but go and listen to Dalai Lama or listen to famous teachers, famous who have thousands of students. Listen to Trungpa Rinpoche. A lot different situation that's happening here. Not better, not worse. It's just, if this makes sense to you on some level, or we have some kind of, you resonate with what I'm saying, then you're probably ready to see what it is I'm pointing at, which I point at all day long. Anyone who will listen to me. More about concepts, Isaac?
Isaac, Bowing, is the primary vision you speak about are words concepts, Bowing?
Yeah. There's structures. A word like banana split does not mean atomic bomb. Different words. So, but if I say banana split, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And unless you've never heard of that before, I've never heard of what that is, or get it mixed up with some other situation. Just like going between one language and another is very interesting. When you and I have been studying for some time now, Mandarin or Chinese language. It's very interesting the way those words show up, just like we're all studying with the help of Chisho and Carl and other people that are participating, and Chezan and so on. I'm studying, translating, not translating, but learning to chant the 30 verses of Vasubandhu, which I think is a really, really valuable teaching that is a set of concepts that created in the 4th century by Vasubandhu that talk about the nature of a subject and object, so the nature of non-duality. Powerful teaching. So it's interesting to look at those words, and like I say, with the help of Chisho, who speaks Sanskrit and knows these words, and also knows how to look them up when he doesn't know them. So, it's just interesting to see how language is used to convey certain kinds of ideas. It's really fascinating to me. And also the Chinese or Mandarin, also it's quite amazing to look into that. But these are ways that concepts come into some kind of a structure or form as a name or as a sound or as a glyph or some kind of a diagram. In the West, of course, we have a phonetic kind of alphabet, but Mandarin is just astonishing because some of those, I think, was it Yu Hung, you probably have a idea, or maybe Joyce does, that was there like 30% of the, is it 30% that are of the characters are actually like pictographs. They actually represent they look like the word, what the word is pointing to, and other ones are more abstract. So those are like visible concepts. They have a structure and they point to something else. So the structure itself is not the thing, just like the concept of anger. We all know what anger is. You could say we all agree what anger is, but your experience, my experience, and someone else's experience of anger or resentment or something like that is probably going to be quite a bit different than the other person, because of dependent origination brings on the illusion of individuality. And it's a powerful illusion to think that to know and to sense that we're so much different than others. Our emotions, our feelings, understanding, our desire for this kind of entertainment, or maybe some kind of entertainment that people really love that you can't understand at all why they would spend any time with that at all. Individuality is so powerful and kind of convinces us that we're a separate being. But it's just more dependent origination that gets together in some kind of a fruit salad of concepts. And this is why it's so important for each of us to take this being that we call me or ourselves or I to the wall, sit down and hold still and get to know yourself deeply. Get to know what is happening in my mind stream, not what Sokuzan thinks about it or any other person thinks about it, but what is fundamentally happening with me. And eventually that shows up in the form of passion, aggression, ignorance, hope, and fear, and all that. It starts to show up in that way, so you can get an idea of what this fundamentally is. And if you see what it fundamentally is, you'll see that it is unreal. That your actual identity, even though you're here and you have ears, you've just had supper, you feel good, you're moving around, you do things, you have feelings, but there's no solid being, there's no personhood here. To realize that, all the fear goes away, all the threat goes away. No one can threaten you. I'm not saying that someone can't come and say, I'm going to kill you. You might be afraid from what's going to happen, but you're not fundamentally afraid. The fundamental fear is not there anymore. Fearless. You don't need anything. You don't need something else. This doesn't mean if you're hungry, they don't need to eat, but the demand is gone. The demand for everything is gone. You've actually returned to your original nature, which is without a self.
玉红宝英,
Go
you say see ourselves in others. Is that all the time? Is there a situational case? Bowing?
A little bit. What it is to see others and see that you're not separate from them. You're not, I wouldn't say you're so much seeing yourself in them, but somewhat. It's very difficult to talk about that and have somebody be like you're talking about, asking a question about it and go along with you and kind of say, yes, you actually see yourself in somebody else, but you also are are seeing your projections about that person, and you see that your projection into that person, you're creating that rather than that person is showing up as that. It's an extremely complicated area, and needs to, the way you work with that is to find out who you are, so that when you look at other people, meet other people, you see that you're not separate from them. It doesn't mean you're the same. It's like the teaching Sandokai, the equality of sameness and difference. The difference is the equality. The sameness is the difference.
Jake Bowing.
Jake,
I've been thinking about projections, and you just said you're seeing the projections of them. How do you regard those projections of another in order to see them as yourself, Bowing?
so you just notice that when you see someone coming in a room from somewhere else, maybe somebody you've never met before, or maybe it's somebody you've known for years, you notice that your ideas about them, positive, negative, neutral, however you want to say it, are dependently arisen, that there's no validity there. You can't really know in some kind of separate situation who or what that person is or what is actually going on with them, because it is something you're projecting onto them that you're looking at, not who they actually are. If you see, I'll say it as simply as I can. It might not going to clear things up at all. If you see who's in front of you, if you see that other person, you don't see another person, you see yourself, you see your true nature. This is why Dogen says, what's the quote again? Go ahead and read it.
A fool sees himself as another,
A fool sees himself as another,
but a wise man sees others as himself.
but a wise man sees others as himself. So it's not like you, when you look at the other person, that is you, or that is, it's just that the relationship there is so powerful that you're no longer separating yourself into this special being who knows more than the other person. That you're no longer doing the polarization there. So you actually see the other person, you're not separate from you. Difficult to say without it sounding silly, perhaps.
A question from Hassan.
Hassan.
When I sit, I can perceive the hollow state of everything. All phenomenon arises from not sure what and ceases quickly into I'm not sure what. I notice my mind tries to figure out the plane where things pop out from, but I don't see anything there. Should I just give up trying to figure out where things originate from?
Yeah. Just watch what moves. I'm talking about Zazen, Shikantaza, sitting meditation. Just watch the movement of the mind. Watch things come and go, come and go. Don't fix anything. Don't create any more chaos. Don't analyze anything. Don't. But do sit down and watch what continues to move in the mind stream or on the wall or down the hallway. Just watch the movement of it. Return to your true nature. This is called actualizing the fundamental point, another teaching of Dogen, Genjo Koan. It's just this, actualizing just this. It's just this. Go ahead.
Dr. Bowing, when you say we see others as ourselves, you're saying something more than just we're seeing our mind. So in other words, when we see others, we're actually seeing our concept of others.
Yes.
So what this is pointing to is something different.
Yes, if you see the I wouldn't say it's stages, but you see the concept, the projection of the other, what you think about the others, you might sense that. but you also know that's your projection and that's unreal. You may stop doing it. You may do it more. It may come, it may go. But when you look at what this fundamentally is, you see yourself. So it's a little of each. Maybe a while where you're just seeing you're projecting onto things, and you just watch that. You don't try to stop that. You don't try to improve, get better, be a person who doesn't project, a person who doesn't judge anybody. Because that's right back to, well, I'm the kind of person that just doesn't judge anybody. I give everybody the benefit of the doubt. I used to judge people. I just saw the meaningless of that, so I stopped. That sound pretty convincing? When you hear that from somebody, you say, yeah, bullshit. You might say that, but then, of course, you're doing what? Same thing to them. But how do you do it and just let it be what it is? Very difficult in the midst of the confusion of oneself, that especially the anger that's arising in yourself and your mind stream sometimes, and the anger or the difficulty or the stress that's happening in your environment. It's very difficult to have a soft heart and allow things to be what they are. Actually, you could say expose yourself, have a sense of tenderness towards everything. Difficult to, it's not something you can just do, but what happens is if you just stop covering up, feel everything, feel it all the way to the center of the earth. Kind of a romantic idea, but it's like that. You won't see anything but yourself. If you don't see anything but yourself, you stop harming everyone. So the initial part might be seeing your projection onto others, which gives you a clue that you might be missing something. And then you may or may not see that you are not separate from anyone. Everywhere you look, you're seeing yourself. Yes.
Sokuzan, when you say everywhere you look, you're seeing yourself, does the Buddha nature still have an appearance of other?
Yes, both. As other and not other at the same time. It's called non-duality. Existence, non-existence. Pain and suffering, pain and suffering and pleasure and enjoyment. Not separate. Separated all to hell, but fundamentally not separate. And that's not something you just push them together and get some kind of result where you're no longer differentiating between those two. You have to actually see it. Question from someone who hasn't asked to start with. Go ahead, you have something?
A question from Udi.
Udi?
Who is intending to see through the false identity, and who does see through it?
Buddha and Buddha. Always Buddha. Actualizing the fundamental point, to use Dogen's. It's just this. Dogen even says, when you sit down and face the wall, this is Buddha. More? Buddhi? More? And so that might not serve to be a response to Udi that's fundamentally going to help the way he perhaps might like to be helped. I'm not speaking on his behalf necessarily, but it has to be responded to in a way that will, so you can fundamentally see what it is rather than use it as a relative thing where you can get a relative answer. There are people who, not this person, who will respond to you in a relative way. And maybe that's what you need. I don't know, but I cannot do that.
Shamba,
Yes.
when we see ourselves in others, are we seeing both Buddha nature and the ego that's covering that up? Bowing?
Perhaps.
How Shambang, I'm just trying to work out a concept about what it is that is seeing ourselves. Bowing.
Well, the seeing is a Buddha nature, just awareness. Awareness that is confused or is disturbed or separating and taking things apart is awareness that has just gone awry and shows up as passion, aggression, and ignorance, separation, warfare, conflict, hell realm, jealous God realm, hungry ghost realm, those states of mind where there's polarity.
Pashan Bowing, so if I see those realms in somebody else, it's really easy to evaluate or judge
It is.
that. So
What's the question?
yeah, how do we see that without jumping on to a conclusion?
Just notice that you jump. Just be aware of the jumping. Don't stop the jumping too quick, but don't necessarily hook up your vocal cords and start giving them a lesson. Not to be angry or something like that. But just be aware that you're tending to do that. There are different ways of working with it. So just like the recommendation I have for people who are having difficulty in a marriage or in a relationship, there's something I call 90-10. Listen 90% of the time and talk 10, and your relationship dynamic will probably clear up quite a bit. Just because you're just going to listen to what the person is saying rather than chatter at them.
June Bowing. When the wise sees herself as the other, what's responding?
There may not be any response. There may not be any production at all. Maybe just receiving. Just a mirror does not do anything. But the mirror can't reflect unless something comes in front of it. And when something comes in front of it, then it shows up as a mirror. Yes. No.
Oh.
No. I like that. Goes on. Nothing? Anyone else? Pick on all monks first. There's a monk. You're a monk. You have a question? Not a monk yet. Not a monk yet. No, not a monk. No more? It's all right. It's fine. Not a problem. Anybody on, I'll take one more question. It's after 9, so we've been doing this for about an hour. Yuhong, go ahead. You have another question?
Yes, Yuhong Baoying. How the wise understand tolerance and no protection? Baoying.
How do the wise understand tolerance?
Yes,
And
and
no-
no protection or less protection. Baoying.
So the situation that one can find oneself in can be devastating for one, no matter how wise they are. They physically could be threatened, they could be killed, and others could be being killed around them. So if there's a lot of devastation going on, there's no way to even train the mind. We're in a hell realm. And so, for instance, some parts of the world, and I won't go into those, we already know what they are. There's hell, it's hell. There's no training going on there. So if there's been no training, then there's not going to be, probably there's not going to be anyone who is wise, but who sees the true nature of this. And if they find themselves just downloaded into that, suddenly they were able to train, and then suddenly they find themselves in a battlefield or in a place where people are being harmed or tortured. It would be very situational. I can't say how that one would function. They may pick up a weapon, possible. They may They may do any number of things. There would be no way that needs to be done. They would function just with whatever they're seeing, or with whatever they're seeing. They wouldn't necessarily show up as someone thinking, "Oh, how wise of them! Look what they're doing there." So, being wise or being clear about the nature of who you are in this world is not so much a state of mind as it is mind, and it doesn't have a personality may come and go in it, but the personality has no gravitas, so it can't claim you as your consciousness as somebody going somewhere, or somebody that needs to stop this or start that. More room for questions if you want to bring them this way. Make them as hard as you can. Don't hesitate to ask me anything. Go ahead.
There's a follow-up question from Udi.
You'll do it.
He says, thank you for the response. I was just asking to see if the answer would shed some light from a different angle that might support or quicken the seeing. Can we quicken it, or is that just materialism?
I don't think it's materialism. We have so much time in this realm. As we all know, if we go to that index, we have so much time. Death comes without warning. Practice, that is said. One of the slogans is "Practice like your hair is on fire," because it is. The things are going. The materialistic appearance of consciousness in a material form is an area where you actually can begin to practice. It's very difficult to practice in the intermediate state, because the intermediate state doesn't have relative space, nor does it have relative time. It's always now, or it's always now here too, but we tend to have a past and a future, and have a yesterday and a tomorrow. Read the last couple of lines of the Sin Sin Ming. It talks about that. Or the heart mind of, what's his name? Sokuzan. So speed it up by, pretty obvious, but train your mind. Sit down, hold still, and watch the continued confusion of the mind come and go and come and go and come and go. Show up and disappear, and show up and disappear. Just watch that in your own mind stream. When you hold your body very still, you get to see a very, very clear picture of the way confusion keeps setting up some kind of a structure that is true, and knocking down something else that it thinks is false. Passion, aggression, and ignorance. Okay, so I think we can dedicate the merit. Is that what we're going to do next? Thank you very much for coming, and thank you for all of your questions.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Jio san shi shifu, shi son bu sa moko sa moko the 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita. All Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokokoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.